Welcome to this industry session. My name's Anna Henderson. I'm a reporter with ABC News covering the regional affairs based out of Canberra, but working with regional journalists all across the country, a couple of whom are here today, which is lovely to see. And I wanted to firstly thank Pip Band from Meat and Livestock Australia for inviting me to moderate the event. This panel is being hosted by the Red Meat Advisory Council. And look, strap in, it's going to be quite a lengthy discussion. We're going to hear from some key people within the industry and also from people in the audience as well. You'll have a chance to pose some questions. The topic is what the industry can do to support a thriving red meat industry to 2030 and beyond. And judging by the ABC's own online news figures, now coverage of these issues, this is a question that does prompt a lot of thought and consideration by a broad range of news consumers. Obviously, it's very important to the people in this room, but I think it's a big question for a lot of Australians and one that I think it's really important that we attack. The first thing I wanted to let you know is that in the background during this session, Sarah Firth, who is an award-winning artist, a graphic recorder, writer and animator, will be providing a visual record of the discussion. So there'll be some sketches coming up throughout the session, providing another way of recording the meeting. So feast your eyes on that as we go along. And I wanted to ask that you give her a quick hand because she's going to be doing quite a lot of work over the next hour and a half. And I just wanted to get a sense of who's in the room as well. So how many people who've come to this session are themselves farmers or graziers? Okay, fabulous. And how many would also classify themselves as industry representatives or people representing a particular part of the industry? And those from other parts of the chain of production as well? Okay. Thank you. I wanted to also remind people at the start of the session, there is actually a Twitter hashtag for this event, so you can continue the discussion on Twitter and also feel free to raise points along the way as well. The hashtag is RedMeat2018. That's RedMeat2018. And now let's give an introduction of the panel. Firstly, Jamie Heinrich from Pandana in Kangaroo Island at the end here, who received the 2017 Nuffield Scholarship supported by Primary Producers SA. He's investigated how to attract and retain young people in the sheep industry, and his family owns and operates the White Suffolk and Pol Merino stud Elamata, as well as commercial self-replacing 18.5 micron Pol Merino flock. And Jamie is also a board member of Sheep Producers Australia. Thanks for joining us. We've also got lot feeder Bryce Cam, who's the Chief Executive Officer of his family's Cam Agricultural Group, an integrated beef enterprise with interests across Queensland. Bryce managed the Wonga Plains feedlot for 10 years, overseeing the operation triple in size. He's the President of the Australian Lot Feeders Association, Vice Chair of Beef Australia Limited, and the outgoing Chair of the Australian Beef Sustainability Steering Group, and he was the Rabobank Emerging Leader Award recipient in 2014. Thank you. Now at the other end of the table here, Processor, giving you a bit of an additional accolade there, Professor. Processor Mark Inglis, who's been the Farm Assurance and Supply Chain Manager of Livestock with JBS Swift Australia for almost 8 years. And during that time, he's been part of the team that has grown the Great Southern Grass-Fed program and brand. And he was previously the MSA Supply Chain Manager at Meat and Livestock Australia. Now to the customer, and we have Susie Craig, who is the Sustainable Supply and Quality Manager with McDonald's Australia, the biggest customer of Australian beef. Very interested to hear from you soon. Thank you. And we'll get the investor perspective as well from Stephanie Russo, who's the Manager of Natural Capital at NAB, where she's responsible for delivery of the Natural Value Strategy, identifying green finance opportunities, improving collaboration with the public sector. She's got an in-depth understanding of environmental and sustainability issues, including climate change and energy efficiency, and she's worked in the Department of Environment and Energy before joining NAB. Thank you. And the peak body representative, Don Mackay, who's the independent chair of the Red Meat Advisory Council and brings over 4 decades of experience in major corporate agriculture in Australia. This includes Managing Director of Ranges Valley Proprietary Limited, Managing Director of an agricultural company and General Manager of Elders. And he has extensive experience in raising funds in capital markets in Australia, Britain, North America and Asia, and investment management. Thank you, Don. Now, we're going to first hear from the panellists on a couple of kind of key overarching questions. And the first one is what the red meat industry will look like in 2030. And we'll start with Jamie.
Okay, thank you. So in 2030, I see the industry looking like a place where we focus on the customer. We can provide a consistent product that's of high quality and is traceable all the way back through. The customer wants to see a sustainable product. They want to see who produces it, and they want to know that it's going to be great every time they have it. We have a premium product, and we really need to push that. To achieve that, we need to go back through the whole supply chain, from all the way back to the genetics, producing animals that are not only productive but good eating quality and are good on an environmental front, going through to the commercial producer, having practices on farm that are not only productive but also good for the environment and good for their business. A lot of the things we already do, like improving our soils, our pastures, putting in shelter belts, they're not only good for production but they're also good for the environment and being sustainable. Going through to that, we need to have objective measurement through the chain and traceability through the chain, so that we can not only know what we should be producing on farm, but getting paid for what we produce on farm, and most importantly, so that lines up with what the client wants and the customer wants all the way through.
Thank you. And Susie, from the perspective of McDonald's, what is your take on this question?
So I think through a customer lens, it's really all about consumers continuing to trust and love eating beef. So certainly, from a McDonald's perspective, in 2030, we would hope that the consumer can continue to feel good about eating beef. They know how it's produced. There's an industry that's very transparent and continuing to share with the consumer about how their product is produced.
And just following up from that, the steps that need to be taken to get to that point for you?
So I think, there's already a lot of great stuff happening. A lot of the producers in this country are already doing great work. I think it's certainly, as we progress through the discussions today, there's the framework that's been developed and, ways in which the industry can all work together to help regain, well, not regain, but continue to maintain the trust that consumers have in Australian beef.
Mm. Bryce, what are your thoughts? Red meat industry 2030.
Oh, look, 2030 sounds like a long time ago, but it's kind of 12 years away. So if you think back to 2006, that's, feels like not that long ago, but I was kind of not far over 20. But I think about the stuff that's going on in our sector at the moment. There's a lot of technology and things like that we talk about. But in 2006, no one had one of these. You didn't have an iPhone or an Android. But we did have, elements of that. We had a telephone, yeah? And we had things like GPS. GPS was invented in the 70s, didn't really open up until commercial reality until the 80s. But you look at kind of 2007, 2006, and now what putting a GPS and a telephone together means for all of us have found, around navigating and finding our way in the world. And I kind of look, the beef industry's got a lot of opportunity in front of us around further adoption. I know in my lifetime, things like helicopter mustering, Brahman cattle, buffalo grass have brought huge innovation, and particularly to Northern Australia. And I think it'll be exciting to see some of the technology and research and development that we're on the cusp of at the moment, but how that actually integrates into where we take the sector in the next 12 years.
Let's move on to Mark. What are your thoughts? As we just noted, it's 12 years away, but it does seem very close.
Yeah, absolutely. I think before we look forward, we've probably got to look back, and I suppose I can talk in regards to what I've seen, and while I've, the Great Southern Program and the Farm Assurance Program has been under my banner. It's a customer-based program, and where we were and the discussions we were having with the customers 8 years ago, and it's only 8 years ago, around certified grass-fed beef, making sure that the animals were treated well and things like that, to see how it has evolved within 8 years, to see no antibiotics being important, to seeing the welfare component of it becoming a huge part of what we do, the non-GMO stuff. To see where we'll be in 2030, I think what it'll end up being is we'll be very transparent. That's pretty much what it'll be. The customers and the consumers at the other end, they're going to want to know the ins and outs of what the product they are buying. They like to know that those animals have been treated very well throughout their life, and really they've only had one bad day in their lifetime. So, and they want all that information. So I think that's information to customers and consumers will be certainly at paramount.
And Steph, from the NAB perspective, from that investor perspective, how important will that element be, and what is that kind of 12-year process for you guys?
Yeah, so I think we have the foundations of what we really need in terms of the opportunities to start to accelerate. I think what we'll be looking at in 2030 is a kind of productive, profitable, kind of vibrant and diversified and also resilient ag sector as a whole, which there are unique challenges and opportunities for red meat, but I think there's a real acceleration that's already occurring and a huge amount of momentum. And I probably see kind of three real areas of opportunity. And the profitability part of that is really important. I think there's a focus on productivity, but also what is really important to make sure that businesses continue to be viable, long-term sustainable businesses into the future. And I think technology, both kind of digital and genomic technologies, will drive and continue to drive some of those productivity and profitability improvements, and also allow us to have greater transparency and communicate to consumers and investors. I think in this digital age, people are looking for more information and trying to make more informed decisions. I think there's also an opportunity around diversification of markets. So we're seeing new markets emerge in the carbon market and opportunities there, but also in sustainable finance markets, which will provide producers and the supply chain with other alternate revenue streams, and that'll be really important in building the resilience of the industry. And then from my perspective, I guess understanding the links between sustainability and the idea that sustainable businesses, even from an environmental perspective, are also lower risk and more profitable in the long term. And so kind of starting to bring those two together.
Don, what's your view? What's your vision for the red meat industry when we get to 2030?
I think the comment that Stephanie made around this being a profitable industry is a sort of a measure of the success of what we might achieve in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. If I go back to the introduction of the Livestock Identification Scheme and vendor declarations, and I recall this really well because I was involved in trying to convince a sceptical farming public about why. What is in this for me? And I think now those things are part of our life. So the challenge for us going forward will be our ability to ensure that the producers and all the people throughout the supply chain understand the importance of the things that we are doing today and the things that we'll be required to do in the future. We need to have an open sharing supply chain that shares data, that shares information, and that everybody understands their role and understands why it's important. Equally, I can recall the introduction of online LPA last year, and I think we explained that badly. Why am I doing this? And it will become obvious over time. If you're a brand owner, and we've got brand owners up here, and I was fortunate to run, a high-end brand, and it was pretty simple. When you go to a customer and they tell you that these are the elements that they require before they even buy your brand. And those elements are around the things the sustainability framework is looking at. It's around how you deal with people, how you deal with the environment, how you deal with animals. So for me, the vision of this will be an industry that is making money, that we are more inclusive and more sharing, and we understand each other's role, and therefore we've got a better business model than the one we've got, which is still very good, but it needs to continue to improve.
Thank you. Well, this morning, some of you might have been here, or many of you, in fact. We won't embarrass anybody. Do you want me to take the call? If everyone wouldn't mind putting their phones on silent, that would be fabulous. Thank you. Look, this morning, the Agriculture Minister, David Littleproud, was talking about that question of sustainability and also whether or not the carbon neutral initiative of MLA could be achieved without a reduction of the overall herd. And he was very confident in his comments that he felt that science and technology would be able to take up a lot of that load and that you wouldn't see that overall reduction in his view. And I wanted to get everyone on the panel's thoughts about that. I mean, is that a realistic standpoint? Jamie, do you think that the
Yeah, I can talk about the flock, not the herd, in my point of view. A lot of the things we can do to minimise our carbon output also can improve our production, whether that's the efficiency of genetics, less methane going out and going more into production, whether that's improving our soils and our pastures, so more carbon's taken into the soil, whether that's planting shelter belts that can make our loss of lambs at birth a lot better. A lot of those things we can do that will not only improve our production but improve, will hopefully make us carbon neutral. So I don't think we have to sacrifice too much.
And from the point of view of McDonald's, Susie, do you think that this is something that is achievable from the research that I'm sure McDonald's has been doing itself about the future of the industry? Do you think that the science and technology is going to move quickly enough to take up that load?
Certainly. I mean, McDonald's have earlier this year come out with our own carbon reduction targets. We've got a science-based target set to reduce carbon emissions in our supply chain by 31% across the globe. We know that the majority of our carbon emissions fall as a result of our supply chain. So, the farms where our crops are grown and our livestock is produced makes up about 65% of our carbon footprint. We're encouraged by the amount of information that's out there that points to just even like natural ways to emit carbon through soil carbon sequestration, through things like conserving forests. I think there's an enormous evolution of innovation and technology as well that really does make that an achievable target.
What do you think, Bryce? I mean, some people in this debate would find it hard to believe that science and technology alone can potentially deliver this. Others would very much be on side. Do you see that tension and do you think the Minister is on the money, or do you think there will be some challenges in achieving that carbon neutrality goal?
Oh, look, I think it's, I look back at it, it's 12 months ago that we're all out at Alice Springs and Richard made the announcement and industry kind of maybe had a heart attack and here we are 12 months later all kind of talking about it. It's never been endorsed or anything like that. But I think it's a great target for industry to have, because all of a sudden the beef industry owns that space of being out in front of this argument. We get flogged as an industry, particularly in Queensland, about vegetation management, about, it's methane output of cattle. This target, puts this sector on the front foot so that customers like McDonald's can kind of, start to achieve their targets. No one's going to shoot us if we don't make it. And that's the big argument that people give me is, what happens if we don't make it? Well, the energy industry will struggle to make it as well, and heaps of sectors will struggle to make it, and that's probably not the end of the world. What it does mean is that over the next 12 years, the beef industry out of any sector in Australia is leading the charge. We heard about the Minister talking about this morning from the energy sector and their complications in dealing in the space between price and managing carbon. And, you know, the Prime Minister lost his job over it. We know it's a contentious national debate. We know it's a global national debate. And all of a sudden, we've put the Australian beef industry, you know, on the front foot of it. We know there's 5 pathways to get there. One of them involves, you know, more feedlotting, so I'm very pro that. But the others, you know, around some of the work in terms of feedstuffs, in improving genetic capability. Sure, there's a lot more work to be done to get the space right, but I think it's an ambitious target. I think it puts our sector on the front foot, and I think it's a great thing.
So, Mark, it has been a year now since this was first kind of raised as a target. What do you think about the achievability of what the Minister this morning said, not reducing herd size, and also whether or not it was a wise thing to do? Have you noticed big changes in the sector as a result?
Yeah, look, I think you always got to have targets to try and achieve, and you've got to set yourself goals and be proactive in whatever you do in the industry, whether it's carbon neutral or whatever it is. I think, you know, from an overall processing sector, there is gains to be made, you know, with utility costs being what they are and things like that. If we can look into renewables, that certainly can help us, you know, try and achieve that, get our emissions down. From a producer perspective, and I suppose within in the program that I run, when I mentioned before, it's been an evolution, I suppose, from where they've started. The carbon neutral, I suppose, discussion is only now just starting to happen, and it's probably on a 2-tiered level. You've probably got a domestic level and then an overseas level. Certainly, as I said, with the majority of the product that we produce going overseas, we are seeing more and more discussion around carbon neutral around our program. There's no doubt about it. But that's not to say there's still things around sustainability that are probably more important currently in the customers and in the consumers' eyes. So once we probably get those right, then something else pops up, and obviously I think the next big one will be probably carbon neutral.
And when you look at what's happening internationally, do you think Australia's on par with a lot of its trading partners and, well, the countries that it might be trading against or competitive with? Where do you see Australia fitting in?
Look, I'm probably not qualified to make that discussion or to have that discussion. Again, I think by Richard coming out and stating that this will be, I think that's been a good start to it. To get it's certainly got it on the table, and people are now discussing it. So I'm not sure where everyone else is in the world, but certainly we've thrown our hat in the ring.
Yep. Stephanie, what do you make of this decision? What have you noticed from an investor point of view as a result of that being out there on the public record? Obviously, the Minister this morning wanted to address some concerns in his commentary. What have you noticed over the last year? Yeah,
so I think it's an achievable target, but I don't think science and technology alone will get us there. I think looking at the incentives and adoption around that science and technology is really where we'll start to see the opportunities, and I think that's a really important element that we need to get right. Agriculture has a lot at stake. Not only are they kind of large, the sector is a large emitter of greenhouse gases, but also really vulnerable to climate change. And we're seeing that at the moment with, almost all of the east coast of Australia in drought. And these sorts of events are only going to become more extreme and more severe and more frequent. So I think there's an opportunity to future-proof the sector as well through the carbon neutral approach, as well as, diversifying and coming up with new revenue streams and taking on that technology and adoption there.
And Don, did you have any thoughts or any views on where Australia now stands internationally, how it compares with some of the other markets or some of its competitors?
Look, my commentary would be somewhat anecdotal, I suspect, but I haven't heard, and Richard and other MLA representatives in the room, and maybe to question they might answer later if there is any knowledge of where we stand. I suspect we're in front. I haven't heard of any other. But for me, just around this whole issue, if you're defending and explaining, then you're already losing. I'm not too sure whose quote that was, and I can't credit them with it, but I think that's where we've been with a lot of things, and this is no different. Our messaging has been complicated. CN 2030 is a simple message. stop Adani is a very simple message. Those that would look to bring our industry undone deliver very simple messages that are hard to defend. And if you're defending, you're already losing. So we've got to work out, and carbon is one of the big items that obviously comes across everyone's Twitter feed every day. We've seen now with the the sort of the so-called red meat tax thing. There are so many people out there that are trying to bring us undone. So we have to have messages in front, and then what we've then got to have is the tools by which the people in this room can deliver that. So we've developed a target, MLA and work. I think Cyro did a lot of the work. So that's fine, and there's been a lot of work done. So we've now got to build the tools and build the extension services that can get it out there. So one of my pets is the lack of extension and adoption in our industry. And if we are to achieve this, then if there's market failure here somewhere, then somebody has to step up to the plate, whether it's government or whether it's industry or a combination of all those things, to find the tools that are being developed and how they can be delivered, and the old what's in it for me, how do I contribute question that people will ask. So if we can do that, then a 2030 target, whether it's 35 or 25, I don't know, but we will start to move down that path. Improvements in this are not defending we are improving, and we can show that against other industries we're probably doing a lot more than many others are. So I think it's come a long way in a year, and it'll go a lot further in the next year or two if we do that work.
Yes, and it's a pretty crowded debate at the moment, and there are some who've commented in this area who've suggested that perhaps one way to achieve that carbon neutrality goal would be to have more synthetic meats in the mix, for example. And I was interested to know from Susie whether McDonald's is looking down that track. Obviously, some restaurants are already going there, looking at offering those kinds of options on their menu. Is that something McDonald's is considering as well?
I can say currently no, we're not looking at it.
Good answer.
That's pretty much it.
Continue. Obviously, it's something that has been embraced in some parts of the world, and we've seen recently a debate that the ABC covered, and was certainly incredible. There was incredible public interest in that question of meat and mince and the naming of products and the shelving of products, and it is an interesting concept whether or not there is a growing market for these products and how they're going to affect the wider industry. Is it something that McDonald's has sort of contemplated or has in the mix at the moment, particularly for people who maybe aren't wanting to buy meat every time?
I'd probably kind of mirror that question to asking a butcher if he wants to serve, alternative meats in his butcher store. McDonald's, beef is in our DNA, so I don't think it's ever going to be a first preference for us to want to explore that. But we are a consumer-driven business, so yes, if the consumer comes to us and are demanding that, then it would certainly be something that we would have to look at. In various markets across the world. McDonald's are serving vegetarian options. From an Australian context, we've tried vegetarian options. They are quite still, we're not selling enough of them to really justify having them on our menu. But the landscape is changing very fast, and the consumers are changing very fast. And, we will always listen to our consumer.
Thank you. And look, I'd be interested to hear from the rest of the panel what your take is on this debate at the moment, and whether or not the regulation is clear enough for the consumer. Jamie, what do you think? We are seeing more of these products on shelves next to your, regular sort of red meat items. What's your view?
I see them as another competitor. We've got other competitors in other proteins and other food products. The best way to combat it is to go out in the front foot and show what we do so well, and that's why we need to be sustainable. If we can go out and tell a really good story of what we do and why it's sustainable and why it's good for the environment and society, then we're beating them. So.
And Bryce, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of a little bit sick of talking about synthetic meat, to be honest. I feel like it's consumed the red meat industry in the last couple of years in that, you know, we're talking about something that's quite futuristic, and let's not forget, I mean, it is called the impossible burger for a reason, because it's kind of fairly impossible. Like, no doubt it's going to be a competitor, it's there, but, I mean, you know, this industry does such a great job in terms of sustainable product that has a great provenance story behind it that we're selling to the world at an affordable price. And we can't forget that either, because this industry has, you know, almost an obligation of supplying affordable protein, and that's not going to come through synthetics in the foreseeable recent future. So we need to, you know, focus on what we're good at, allow the synthetic industry to go on their own journey, and we will flog them, you know, from pillar to post every way of that, because of all the capacity of the people invested in this business, and the structures and the, you know, the accountability that we've invested in behind our product. And I think it's going to be a long journey before we're seriously competing on shelf with synthetic meat.
And in terms, I guess, of the JBS side of things, Mark, do you think that this is something that has overtaken the debate, or is it being treated seriously enough by the sector?
I think it's been treated seriously enough. I mean, I agree with Jamie and Bryce. I mean, it'll just be another competitor within the industry. You know, we've got our main competitors now are not, you know, within ourselves are not lamb, or it's actually the chicken and pork industry that we actually compete against from a red meat sector. So it's just going to be like another protein on the shelf that you know, that we have to deal with as an industry. I think the great thing that we've got going for us, though, is that you know, the MSA grading system in Australia, one of the best in the world, and continues to be the leader in eating quality. I mean, what is the eating quality difference between an absolutely fantastic MB2 marble score Scotch, whether it's grass or grain, compared to a minced up bit of, you know, synthetic meat sitting on a burger? I mean, there is no competition.
Stephanie, from an investor perspective, I mean, this is obviously a space where some pretty wealthy people are putting their money internationally, but in Australia, have you seen market changes, or do you think it is a significant new player, or just the same as any other protein competitor?
So I think it's in that general competitor space, and I think it is about, you know, for the red meat industry to look at the opportunities and why consumers are looking at different products. And I think the sustainability framework is a great opportunity to look at the way that the red meat industry can communicate to consumers and to investors, managing those risks and keeping up with competition and protecting their brand. And I think that's where the real opportunity is. You know, at the moment where there will be competitors into the future and kind of new types of lab-grown meat and alternatives that we don't even know about now. So it's about protecting that industry, managing those risks, and making sure it remains competitive and something that consumers are interested in. I think that's really the place to be focusing.
And just following up from that, Don, in terms of the way things are labelled at the moment and some of those discussions about what different words mean, mince, for example, or the way things can be promoted that might blur the lines, do you think that the regulation, the law at the moment is clear enough, or would you like to see changes?
I'll make a couple of comments, and the second one probably contradicts the first, but I've got a concern that we allow statements such as clean meat, for example. I don't like that. I think we should have an ability to deal with that in some way. That's one. But then sort of, again, under the sort of defending banner, I don't think roaring down and beating them up about a lot of these things is going to help us either. So if you look at what occurred, say, in the wine industry, where Australia produced Chablis, Burgundy, Champagne, and then we lost that. And I think our industry was probably the best thing ever happened. You know, we focused on how we branded our product based on grapes. We did a whole lot of things differently. So this, for me, is the opportunity to do the things that the other panellists have just spoken about. You know, what are the benefits of the product that we produce? It's a little like the competitiveness issue of Australia versus other countries. That's an issue for us. But there are positives that we bring that other countries can't bring, and particularly around sustainability, around shelf life, around a whole lot of other things that we're never going to have $10 per hour staff in our processing facilities. That's not going to happen. So we have to deliver the things we can, and those things are all about competing against all those other proteins, all those other countries, because we weren't talking about synthetic meat that long ago. So in 10 or 12 years' time, we'll be talking about something else altogether.
Yeah.
So these will just keep on coming and coming and coming. So we've just got to keep working on the benefits and advantages that we've got, and the fact that what we are producing is a product that is sustainable in our environment.
And look, for meat and livestock, Australia to put forward this target is one thing, but obviously the federal government also has the ability to put forward laws, and the federal parliament has the ability to consider them. And we're in a situation at the moment where there has been widespread drought conditions across parts of Australia and in key parts of Australia where livestock is grown and where Australia's food is grown. To the panel generally, I guess the question now becomes, as we look at these drought conditions, is the federal government doing enough to help the sector, and are there things in terms of that broader government side of things that they could be doing to provide more assistance? And look, I will start with the producers. So Jamie, I'll start with you. What do you think? Obviously, you're not in a part of Australia that is as particularly affected at the moment, but what do you think?
Yeah, where we are, we're okay. We're below average, but I can't really complain. So I feel a bit awkward commenting on this as well, because I'm not going through what a lot of other people are going through. My opinion, looking outside of just this drought, my opinion is putting things in place so that we can handle droughts in the future. That doesn't help right now, but I think the way the government can help is in putting in infrastructure, putting things like FMDs, things like tools that we can use, so then when the next drought comes around, we're a lot more prepared for it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's...
And Bryce, where are you coming from on this? Do you think that there has been enough in terms of federal policy? There's some discussion about whether or not Australia does have a current drought policy. There are obviously things you can find online, but some people who are experts in this sector argue that that doesn't constitute a drought policy that deals with the ongoing changes in the climate. Do you think that the federal government needs to change its approach?
I'd like the conversation to change away from drought policy and actually go to talking about an agricultural policy and strategy for the nation, because I kind of agree with Jamie. It's not, I mean, drought's a terrible thing. Those that are going through it, it's tough. And there is a support mechanism, through our society that we have to affect, or support those that are doing it immensely tough. But the best way you help an agricultural, sector is through, building a resilient agricultural sector for the rest of the decade. And to me, that's things, building good infrastructure around our roads and ports. That's building water infrastructure in Northern Australia. That's looking at our taxation system, about incentivising people investing in rural and regional Australia and the businesses that operate in it. That's getting good free trade agreements that actually are free trade agreements, not a minutiae of halfway of being a free trade agreement. So that we actually build good export market opportunities. We get producers that are earning well in the good seasons, so that they can manage their own balance sheet and business through the poorer seasons. Drought's a reality in this nation. It's been here since before we came here, and it's not going to go away. But it's vital that rather than the crying happen now while the drought's on, we actually start talking about how we're going to rebuild and make a really sustainable and prospering beef industry, because that's what we need governments to do, not help us right now.
Mm. And we're in this broader question of sustainability, Mark. When you look at the question of what levers the federal government, for example, or the federal parliament could pull, we're in drought at the moment, and there are some areas that have received some welcome rain, but still some areas of Australia that are in desperate need. Do you think that the government could be doing more or approaching things differently?
Look, I think I agree with everything that Bryce just said before. I mean, I think he's hit the nail on the head. We need to, as an industry, make sure that in the good times we're putting things away. So for those bad times. And you're right, it's terrible with the producers that are currently going through that system. I'm coming up on 50 years, and I don't know how many droughts I've seen, but it's the same story every time they come about. The shots on the television and things like that. I don't think we've actually improved in this area over a very long time. So again, we should be concentrating on being resilient, and a lot of farmers are resilient. But again, putting things away, I don't know where the government fits into that.
Don, what do you think? Has the industry maybe struggled at some points to cut through in this conversation in telling the story of what's happening in the sector? Where has the disconnect happened, given that producers and people in the supply chain are saying this?
Two comments. Firstly, Bryce absolutely nailed it. I agree. That's exactly the right place to be, and it's a place where, as an industry, we've been giving advice to the government and opposition about that exact way to deal with it. My second commentary is that we should be talking about the large percentage of people in this country in farming who have pre-prepared for this. They've been doing it for a long time, and I think they're the stories we should be telling. Offended is the wrong word, but I'm I guess annoyed with the reality television world that we now are in, and from my point of view, the commercial channels are now reality television hours. There was a race to the bottom to find some poor farmer who was in trouble, and I think those vision was inappropriate. They've just done it the wrong way. The only good thing about all that, it did show the level of support that exists for agriculture from the general population, so that's a positive. But I really think we should be focusing on how the people that have dealt with it. You know, our family's been farming since the mid-1800s in Western New South Wales, you know, in a 12-inch rainfall, so I know about drought, and we were always prepared. We were doing that years and years ago, and most people are. I'm looking at somebody sitting in the front here who operates in a dry area and runs an organic operation, and I'm sure, you know, it's part of what you do, and I think that's the thing that we've got to ensure. One other rider is that I really don't want government, other than a baseline to make sure people are properly cared for, and that should be a government responsibility. But we should not be financing people who then erode the residual equity they've got. We should be making sure that the good operations are taking over those that can't be sustained, because they'll employ more, they'll run more, they'll produce more, and then we will have a more sustainable approach to this.
Well, let's look a bit more deeply at the beef and sheep sustainability frameworks and hear some insights about that. Bryce, you're the outgoing chair of the steering committee for the beef sustainability framework. How is it going to give that support to the 2030 time frame? What's going to be the key things that you see that organisation doing?
Look, I do think that further in time, when we get to 2030, it won't be sustainability we're talking about. Sustainability is a catch cry at the moment, and across all sectors. It's always been there. I mean, when I was studying in Copenhagen, it was called corporate social responsibility, and the Scandinavians were really good at talking about that and triple bottom lining. And now we've, you know, wrapped this up, and sustainability is the topic that across all sectors, and from a consumer perspective and a production perspective, we have to all speak the same language and prove our credentials. So to me, the really important work that has been done over the past sort of 3 to 4 years in the beef sustainability framework space is engaging those outside stakeholders. So engaging the likes of McDonald's, the investor community and NAB, outside stakeholders that are not at all invested in the beef supply chain. So, you know, people like the WWF or the RSPCA who've got an interest in what's going on in this sector and involving them in the conversation about what this sector is doing or not doing in terms of meeting its, you know, commitments and sustainability credentials to an ever increasingly interested public. I think the work that we have done through the consultative committee processes and engaging those outside stakeholders in this conversation has been really good, and it now sets the beef industry up as we start to now, you know, that we've got some baseline data around over half the indicators to start to shift the needle. It is really important that this starts to then feed up into our strategic plan from, you know, the holistic side of the beef industry. Because that's how I kind of see this. It might not be called the sustainability framework in 2030, but it'll be a core part of how we analyse whether we've done a good job with our levy dollar, investing that in marketing or building more resilience in profits in producers, or helping us, to get better free trade access overseas. The framework and measuring the indicators will be a good job of assessing ourselves as an industry, both as private operators, as industry representative bodies, as brand owners, in how we're going on that journey. And I think that's the most important part, is that we do start to measure and monitor all of that across the indicators. The indicators might come and go and change as well. And then we can progress where that has come over time. I think the other part that excites me about the beef sustainability framework is it gives us control over some of those contentious issues again. So I will, Queensland, that's vegetation management at the moment. But if you take that in the context of the framework and look at it, how we're starting to look at it, you start talking about the balance of tree and grass cover. All of a sudden you're not talking about land clearing and vegetation management, you're about managing our grasslands. And I get a shiver up my spine when I say that, because I think it's one of the greatest assets we have as our nation is our grasslands, and we should, as the custodians of those grasslands, be driving the conversation on how we're managing those. If you look at the situation in the States, and Susie might be able to talk to it more, the grasslands are, there's a whole national story about grassland management, preserving those, getting, the wider community excited about that. And that's what the beef industry needs to lead the charge on here in Australia, and particularly in Queensland, because we know, if you look into the data, that trees are growing at a far increasing rate than they are being flattened in Queensland, because it's been illegal for some 25 years to flatten new areas. So it's that's in my view an example of how the beef industry can take control of a contentious issue, own the space, and actually show what good work our sector's doing.
Well, Susie, just following on from that, it's my understanding that McDonald's has pledged to eliminate deforestation from its beef supply chain by 2020, focusing on countries that have that identified deforestation risks, including Australia. So what does that mean for McDonald's in terms of buying beef in Australia?
I think it's, it's not just McDonald's that have got a commitment like this. There's a lot of consumer brands that have similar commitments. But I think it really does bring to life, the importance of the framework and other groups like the framework that are operating in other markets with similar risks. It's really around how we all work together to find to find the best workable solutions, to meet those types of targets. We have got a target now. We have to be able to demonstrate that we're actively seeking, a way to demonstrate to customers that they don't have to feel like if they're eating a Big Mac that there's some farmer clearing their land. We all know that's not the situation. So again, it's how do we create that transparency and increase the consumer's confidence. We don't have all the answers yet, and we are certainly working closely with the industry to try to work out how we do that in a positive way.
Can I just, sorry to jump in,
sure.
but I think McDonald's needs some congratulations for the way that they've embraced this space in particular in an Australian perspective, because we're not deforesting the Amazon here in Australia, right? But we do have the reality that we have to manage our mulga lands or our brigalow regrowth situations. But McDonald's hasn't just said no deforestation. They've invested in the space, got involved with industry to understand what this commitment means from an Australian perspective. And I think having that option through the beef sustainability framework is a great way to engage with a big multinational and translate what that means to an Australian perspective and what is going to work for our supply chains and not.
And Jamie, what about where you live on Kangaroo Island, where there are projects for tree plantations and green and carbon trading projects? What do you think about the mix there?
Depends on what the purpose is. Kangaroo Island has had huge blue gum plantations over some of the best grazing land over the island. That's probably one of the worst things, other than the wool crash, to happen to the island's agriculture, because They were all planted, and there's actually no way to get them off the island, so they're overdue for harvest, and they're all sitting there. So planting trees for the wrong reasons, I'm really not very excited about. But in small doses, for the right reasons, those shelter belts and managing a farm and putting it in the right places, I think is a good way forward. But we need to look more at, as you said, with the grasslands and getting better pastures in place and improving our soils as well, because that's a big part of it as well. So.
Yep. Absolutely, Don.
I think the challenge and opportunity for the sustainability activities that flow from the framework and how we've learned to understand what our customers and everybody else wants and what we want is how we transfer that to the people. So the challenge, and we've discussed this at the framework, yes, we've got the measurement, we've got the tools, we've got the KPIs, all those things are done. But I go back to a comment I made earlier, you know, what's in it for me, what is my contribution to this, why would I do it, you know, how do I contribute, how does it, you know, that's the really critical bit. You've got to get the rubber on the road with the people who are running and managing, you know, the lands of Australia. And they will then, you know, make these things go through the continuous improvement that we expect that should come. So that extension into the grazing operators of Australia will be the key to the success from here. And that's one that, you know, whether it's commercial operators, whether there's industry or whether there's government, I don't know, but we do need to work out how to do that.
Mm. And Stephanie?
Yeah, I'll just sort of add to it, I suppose.
Professor, yes.
I do not have any issue, and over 8 years of taking overseas clients onto farms in Australia. I think the majority of producers are already doing what we want or what needs to be done. They are very proud of their operations. They are managing nutrients. They are planting trees. They are, whether they realise it or not, I think they're actually already well down that track. Landcare's got a lot to do with it. I mean, Landcare's been a fantastic program in Australia, especially out of Western Australia around salinity and things like that. And I see it through Victoria. The Western Districts of Victoria, from where I come from, used to be a treeless plain. It's not now. It's full of tree plantation or tree lines and protective trees all through there. So I think producers in the red meadows, they're already doing what we just need to recognise it.
Stephanie, can I ask you, in relation to the video at the start and what NAB is doing in natural capital and considering it for its lending decisions, for the uninitiated, what is natural capital, firstly?
So we use natural capital language to talk about natural assets as assets in the same way that we would look at financial assets or your human capital. So that's your soil, water, biodiversity, climate and energy, and the services that they provide. So if you think about that in the ag context, there's both the impacts of the ag sector on those assets, but also huge dependencies. And I think that kind of goes to your point around the way that people on farm are already beginning to manage and recognise the value of those assets. And for us, and I was going to jump in before with Don, I think part of what we're trying to do with our natural value strategy, and we've committed to incorporating natural capital metrics in our credit risk decision making. And essentially what that means is we'll be looking at the sustainability and the way that natural capital is being managed on farm at that individual level in the way that we make decisions. So a sustainable farm that's also lower risk and more resilient and has more consistent financial performance because of it will be rewarded with lower interest rates. But part of that is taking these high level insights that we get through frameworks like the beef sustainability framework and looking at what that means for individual on-farm decision making and the sorts of trade-offs and decisions. Where do you put trees and vegetation on your farm? Where's the appropriate place to put that to maximise the benefits both for the environment and productive benefits? So that's really where we're focusing.
So Don, how do you take that information and these big frameworks and the things which are industry-wide and then ensure that on someone's individual farm where they're, you know, probably working incredibly hard and dealing with their day-to-day, that they have that at their disposal to be able to actually make changes on their property or ensure that they're sort of compliant?
Yeah, that's the answer to the question we probably don't have sufficiently. But what I guess if I restate the opportunity, and the opportunity is to deliver to producers tools and an understanding and a recognition of why. So if you go to a farmer in North Queensland and you explain to them why they should be using more pole genetics, why they should be using anaesthetic products at branding time, you know, they need to understand why that's important. And this is all part of what we've been developing, but I don't think the messaging, we haven't developed the messaging system sufficiently so that we get, you know, uptake of these things. As I go back to the vendor decks and the NLIS and those things, it was a hard sell, but I think those two alone have kept us in markets around the world for a long time, and these things will keep us in markets around the world. If you're in a country like Australia, which is so different to the US, I was in the US at the BSE in December 2001, help me, I think that's right, and I remember George W. putting his hand on the heart and saying, you know, eat one for the farmers. And if you're in a country that eats 90% of its production, that's exactly what happened. We can't do that here. So it's, you know, a real problem.
Everybody, there'll be an opportunity for audience questions very soon. There's just one more from me. We started off this discussion talking about the question of brand management, and obviously the live export industry has probably been one of the areas that has generated the most discussion in Australia in terms of the red meat industry, and I suppose the question to the group is how damaged is that brand as a result, and is it really a fait accompli that eventually that industry won't exist in Australia, given some of the political discussions that are going on at the moment? What kind of efforts should be gone to deal with that? Jamie?
Okay, yep, live export. So to start with, Sheep Producers Australia is in full support of the live export industry, but we really think, we demand that welfare is taken very, very seriously and done very properly. On a practical level, it is sustainable long term. We can ensure that welfare is at the top level as long as the whole supply chain is done properly and it is regulated properly. The biggest challenge is not on whether we can do it and whether we are doing it. It's how we are seen in the public. And that's where we're back on the back foot, and what we've already spoken about today. We really need to, as agriculture, as a whole supply chain, we really need to find ways to get on the front foot and show all the amazing things we do, so that when one video comes out, it doesn't tar the whole industry. That's really the next step of what we have to do to continue on.
Bryce, we're already seeing it as a potential election issue for the next federal election. There are certain electorates where it was quite clear until certain members of the government were brought into the front bench that they were prepared to put themselves on the line over the question of live exports. From what you are seeing, do you think that there is going to be an end point for this industry, or what do you think is the likely future?
From where it sits at the moment, I don't think there is an end point for the sector. I think you know, particularly we've learned a lot since 2011 in the beef sector, and I think the sheep sector is going through that learning phase right at the moment. I think you heard it from the minister here himself this morning, is that industry has got guidelines and standards that need to be adhered to. And things like the beef sustainability framework will report, you know, how well we're meeting our targets and expectations. But as a sector, and with the support of government, when people stray outside those rules in terms of operators, industry's got to have the ability to say that's not how we operate as Australia Inc. and call people out on it. And I think that movement or that understanding is here now. And I think for an industry, you know, it's like the live export industry, they understand that now, you know, far more than probably many others of us. And I think that's a wake-up call to, you know, to all of us in industry to understand the commitment we have, you know, not only to ourselves and our markets, but also the wider stakeholders to our sectors.
Susie, you're obviously on the customer side of things, and this is, a long bow in some ways, but does McDonald's see a flow-on effect to the purchase of its food as a result of some of these scandals when they become public? Do you know if there's any flow-on effect like that?
Well, we don't have any live export in our supply chain, so
Yep.
it's not something I would comment on.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Look, Mark, what do you think? I mean, there are some within the parliament who think this is a fait accompli, but there are obviously others who are prepared to
I'm
fight.
probably not the right person to ask in regards to live export.
He's the professor.
Probably. The process is. They would like to see them processed here in Australia.
Yep.
So that's pretty much, yeah.
Don, what needs to change in terms of, obviously when you have these big scandals happen and they are reported very widely in the media, what does the industry do to try and show the other side?
I'm trying to redevelop that tickle in my throat.
No, you can't get out of this
Going
one.
down this one. I have a very strong view that live export has a life, no question. There are areas and there are markets for which live export, for which the live export of animals in an appropriate way to proper systems offshore are a very valid and reasonable method of doing business. I think it's a bit unfortunate that there's been some vision taken of people doing things inappropriately. We've seen government's response sometimes disproportionate and fast. We've got an industry in most cases that does this very well. We've got some that don't do it well, and others, and I think it was Bryce or others said we've got to call them out, and that's exactly right. So we've got to make sure that we are doing things not just at the standard, but above the standard and at the sort of level that will be expected, because the difficulty we have is that people who want you to not have animals at all, it doesn't matter where you put the bar, so they will continue to prosecute their case. But those people don't represent the entire public. But what we've lost here is our ability to get a message to people about that. So well-funded organisations with a very simple message, stop LiveX, stop Adani, or whatever it is, that's a really easy message, and they sell it with a lot of money. So we do have to have an ability to show why this is important, why it works, and why it is good for the animals as well, because there are so many good stories, and they will never see the light of day versus that single bad event. So for me, we do have to make sure that there is an understanding as to what the majority of industry does well, and that there are plenty of operators and plenty of examples, particularly for northern cattle, that do this extremely well. They've already put in people who are observers, they've already done CC cameras, they've already got their supply chains fully contained. That's the story, and it's a bit like the drought thing. And let's find the good stories and not just simply focus on those others, and get our leaders and our politicians and our media portraying things in that form.
There are some electorates, some of those sort of peri-urban electorates, or electorates that do include both regional centres and country areas, where this is considered to possibly be quite a big election issue. And I know there are some within the Labor Party, for example, wanting to capitalise in some of those regional electorates because they think public opinion is turning on this. What do you think of that kind of analysis?
Well, it's turning because we haven't been able to sell our message properly. I see this a lot. I followed a motor car on my way home the other night that had, banned live export on the back of the window. My wife took a photograph of Bank Australia. I don't know who owns Bank Australia. If you lend to live export, then you don't have a life in Bank Australia. So there are messages being put out there that are an issue because we haven't found a way of appropriately countering that. If you sit down with people in a cafe in the street who have an opinion about live export with no knowledge at all and no information other than things that they've seen or heard on the television, it's a pretty easy thing, and particularly in WA. It's cheap, it's in WA, I'm sitting in a suburb in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, it's sort of over there. So they've made decisions about it without really understanding what it means. and really understanding the number of people and the actual love for the animals that these people really have. So we've got to find a method of cutting through, and we haven't found it yet, in my view.
And I am paraphrasing from memory, but the National Farmers Federation today did have some research out that suggested a lot of Australians don't sort of know or have much of a wish to find out where their food comes from, particularly young Australians. So it is interesting that this debate's happening in that climate. Are you aware of that survey, and were you surprised by the results?
No, I'm not aware of it, but I'm not surprised. There's no, I have a son, and his wife is a typical, urban lady, and I don't think she particularly wants to understand where they come from, and that's fair enough. But the difficulty is when it's put in front of your face on national television, 15 and 30-second paid advertisements in the middle of the news, then they then replicate that, and to a degree, I'm surprised that it hasn't impacted on sales out of a McDonald's, for example, because the problem we've got is that it gets linked together. You start to meld it all together, and it's all related to what we do. So we've got to uncouple that. We've got to make sure we deal with the poor performance, but have good performance well in advance of these issues, so that we don't have these things happening.
And just to give you guys the details there, it's young Australians, 18 to 29, the most likely to say they don't care how their food and fibre is grown. That was a poll released by the NFF today. So, look, we're going to open up the floor to questions very soon, and you are the experts, and I'm really looking forward to what you want to cover. One thing I just wanted to mention before we go on to that is that there is a Menti activity you can do along with this session, so that we can look at what the key issues are that you want to raise, the key, I suppose, words that you associate with what's happening. The questions are very simple, and you just go online to www.menti.com, and there's a code there, 800633, and you can take part in that. We're really interested to see what you want to add there. And I think it's the three biggest challenges you see for the red meat industry. So have a go. We'd love to hear what you have to say. So we will go on to questions pretty soon. Are we good to go? We've got a microphone. Just a couple of microphones here and here. So thank you.
Jeff Maynard, a Central Queensland beef producer. You'll have to excuse me, I've just trying to recap a few points and took some notes as you were talking, but over the last 12 months we've seen a dramatic acceleration of the anti-meat campaign and messaging. For the first time, mainstream print media like the Australian and the Courier Mail have been running anti-meat articles fairly regularly. Secondly, we are seeing the world's richest and most influential billionaires advocating no consumption of red meat, supposedly to save the environment and betterment of one's health. They are investing heavily in fake meat and not serving meat on company menus. Thirdly, McDonald's, Hungry Jack's this year, proudly offering vegan burgers, and in Hungry Jack's case, spending front and centre promotion dollars marketing this new product placement. Also this week we saw the ABC running a poll where they're asking should there be a tax on red meat, inferring that it's a foregone conclusion that meat is bad for the environment. These people are sort of placing us in the same category as tobacco. We laugh at that concept, but that's what they're suggesting. Do we have, in social media, when we as farmers get together, if we're very successful with a story, we get 200 or 2,000 likes or views. You watch the animal activists and they get in the 26 million. I watched one and it went for 3 weeks and it got to 26 million. So they're really stomping on us as far as getting messaging here. With that as the background, do we have a robust, or should we have a robust and well-resourced strategic and targeted communications plan to combat this uninformed assault? Okay, well, look, Jeff, I won't go to some of the specific detail of your question because I'm not
quite sure of the poll that, from the ABC referred to. I hope it did apply with our editorial standards, and I'm happy to have a look at it later. But let's open up that question to the group in terms of the communication strategy from the production side of things. What do you think, Jamie?
Well, the answer is yes. All these topics that we've spoken about, whether it be live export, whether it be fake meat, but anything that we get attacked on, we need to be on the front foot, because defending it never works. So we need to go out there and tell everyone what we do well and why we do it well and why we love what we do and why we are an amazing product. The sustainability framework, beef and then sheep's having one this year, we're doing one. That'll be a really good base to do that, to show what we're actually doing and why we are sustainable. But yeah, the resources at the moment, getting together as an industry and working with other industries and maybe even other countries, so our budget is in line with groups like PETA. That's probably something that we need to work together on, and working together in big groups like that is always difficult, but it's something that we need to do.
Susie, there was a part of that question related to McDonald's and other fast food chains selling vegan meals. What's your response to Jeff's concerns about that?
I mean, I think that comment was just part of, painting a bigger picture, certainly. And, to the point about, does the industry need, a communication strategy? I think absolutely yes, but, behind every good communication strategy, there needs to be facts and data, so that you're not just telling stories. And I think certainly that is the role of the framework.
Bryce, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so
Is there enough money being put into the industry to fight some of these battles, or to put forward the alternative view?
there's never enough money, but no one wants a $6 levy. So so I think, Jeff, I think you're right. I think we do need a comms plan around this. But I think what Susie just mentioned is right as well. So you've got to have your deck, sorted out at home first. And you've got to have good integrity systems and quality assurance systems behind that. And our industry's invested in that for, over 25 years. You've got to have a report card on monitoring progress and a commitment to continual progress. I don't think in, the beef sector space, we've been building that over the last 4. But I think, and Don said it a couple of times today, good, clear messages that impact and can compete against the naysayers out there, I think is the final element that I do think we need to ramp up. It's interesting. We see so much public, support around the drought piece. We've got to find some way of linking that we're not all basket cases that need a handout, in a dry dam somewhere. Linking that to that, actually, this is a, successful, resilient, whatever the figure is, Don, $40 billion sector that is now the largest manufacturing sector left in the country. People should be proud about that. They should get behind this sector and support it, because it's delivering a great foodstuff and it's exporting it around the world. So I think we've done a lot of the back work. I think the comm strategy that delivers some good, clear messages is one part that I think we've yet to do. And finally, and I think that then takes, good industry structures and a lobby group, because you look at, you mentioned tobacco, and there would not be an industry in the world that has a better lobby group in holding its case to stay in business. And I think, we need that support as well.
Don, is red meat the new tobacco?
No, absolutely not. The thing we've got to achieve here, we talk to ourselves on social media. So if you dissect all the people that have a look at the nice things we say, it's us. We spent some time during the course of this year considering, media communications type plans, and I won't say the person that we met with and spoke to, but a very unusual vegan person with a very high profile and we had some good advice and discussion with that company, and we have to find the champions of our industry that have got 5 million followers. I don't know how many I've got, but it's measured in a few hundred, I suspect. no one takes any notice other than people in the industry. So we've got to figure out a communication strategy that talks about the things that Bryce and others have mentioned about, what we are and what we do, and the relevance and importance of this agricultural sector. The people in this room and the people that you represent and all the farmers out there manage, control, look after and improve the environment on half of, I don't know what the number is, but it's probably half of the country. And you don't get paid for it, it's part of what you do. We don't get that message. We take care of millions of sheep and millions of cattle very, very well every day, and goats and pigs and chickens. And so somehow or other, that messaging has been lost, and the simplification and the right person delivering it is what we've lacked. So if Richard Branson comes out and says anything, 20 million people know within a second. And that's what we don't have.
You might need to be a bit more of an influencer, Don, more selfies and...
I think it's too late for me.
Stephanie, what's your view? Do you think it's a communications problem? Do you think it's a reality problem? Do you think it's a marketing problem?
I think it's bigger than just a communications problem. I think there is a strong opportunity around a communications piece, but every time something goes wrong or someone sees a kind of bad story, the demands for transparency and improved data become even stronger. And, the industry is only as strong as its kind of, we'll say, worst performer, and the story that comes out in the media in that space. So I think it's a communications strategy coupled with, strong agreement across the sector about the things that are really important, holding people to account when they do get things wrong, and supporting sectors to transition. And I think we've seen that with, live meat exports. We've also seen that in terms of land clearing, that if people are using effectively stories of, one or two people who are doing the wrong thing to build their campaign, no amount of positive communication and media without that transparency, without tools that people can look into, is going to be effective. I don't have the solution to that. The red meat sector is not the only part of the ag industry or industry in Australia that's dealing with that, but I think it has to be more than just the communication and the messaging. You need to have all of the framework sitting behind that to actually make sure that you're kind of lifting the bottom of the sector and making sure that people are, doing the right thing in the mind of consumers and investors.
And do you think there's enough transparency, Mark? Do you think that there's enough at the disposal, say, of the reporter who might be looking at the vision about one aspect? They might also be able to access perhaps the many hundreds of others who aren't doing that. Do you think that that's available?
I think in the past we haven't been very good at that. History tells us that that's the case. I think... but there is a groundswell, certainly from producers and from a producer perspective, about telling the good stories and being transparent. I think we've still got a long way to go, and this is by no means reflective of the room. But you just got to look at the average age of the producers that are out there, and how they react to technology. I mean, you look at my 13-year-old girl. This thing is not out of her hand at all. She's texting her friend will be there, and she's texting her, So, but they live on these things. So information flow happens very, very quickly. We need to, as an industry, and I put it back onto. I've just become a Twitterer and a Facebooker and all that sort of stuff. And as I said, I'm nearly 50. I struggle to keep up with some of the others and the time that they've got on that phone. But I think as an industry, we do need to start becoming very proactive in telling the good stories that are out there, and trying to get those followers and trying to access these influencers and the people that are out there, that are there that will carry our story.
And we've seen the government trying to do the same thing with varying degrees of success recently. It's a delicate balance. Now, I just wanted to let everybody know, we've still got time for some more audience questions, but while we're doing that, the Menti activity, thank you very much for those who've done it online, please take part. There's a second activity asking the audience the biggest opportunities for the red meat industry. So please give us your thoughts on that, and they'll be compiled and give another snapshot of what you've taken away from this session, what you see as the future of the industry. Now, do we have another question from the audience? Couple? No worries. If you've got one for a specific person on the panel, just say, and we'll try and speed through a couple if they relate to one particular element.
Josie Angus from Clermont in Queensland. In listening to the panel today, I guess I probably got confused in terms of audience, because I think it's a really key thing. Some of the, when we pull together data and when we pull together communications, we've talked to back to industry today in terms of extension. We've talked to consumers. We've talked to NGOs. We've talked to industry customers, and each of those, I guess, and investors, and they're different messages. And if I think of one headline number that out of the sustainability framework so far as the 13 kilograms per kilogram of live weight, that makes my cow, 500 kilo cow running around in the paddock, worth around 6.5 tonnes of carbon. At the same time, the coal industry are telling us that mining 1 tonne of coal is worth about 25 kilograms of emissions. So I think we've got so far to go in terms of audience, and I've liked where the discussion's gone in terms of coming up with simple messages that have cut through, because I'm really concerned when I pick up the book from the sustainability framework this year is who is the audience, and in terms of the framework, where do you see your audience, and how do we deal with the fact that we've got so many different audiences?
Okay. Don, that sounds like one for you.
I thought it might have been your brother, Jeff. Look, you are absolutely correct. This is where I think we've got a lot of work to do, is this document is, as yet, in my view, hasn't gone down the several paths that it needs to run. So it's a document that, and a process going forward, that will provide us with a base for discussion with customers around the world and government and the public. You've then got how this relates to you, what can you do? So those messages are very different. So there's no doubt in my mind that when this started, and it's not that long since it sort of kicked off, and I wondered what it would be, and I wondered where it would go, and it's been a lot more than I thought it would be initially. I think it's been fantastic what's been done, and all the people who are involved in it, going back to Prue and the original group, and the work that MLA have done. So we've got this. This is, I think, an extremely valuable tool, and we've now got to work out how to use it and how to drive it down those different channels that you talked about, because I just don't think we don't understand how to do that yet. But it is critical that we do. Yeah.
To be continued.
Can I just quickly add?
Sure.
I think it's about, and I think the role that the red meat, the beef sustainability framework plays is giving people the same types of data and information. The messages will be different for your audience, but this process has brought people together from across all sectors in developing that framework, which I think is really unique. So what you've got is people coming together with some agreement around how these different parameters will be measured and what the data looks like. You can then take that and communicate that to different audiences. I think one of the problems we have is that different sectors are using different data to back up their messages. So I think there's a really fundamental role that the framework provides in having that same set of data that people can use to then take off and craft messages around, and getting some agreement from the environmental sector as well as producers themselves, from lenders, from consumers, all in the room together around what information do we need to be able to feed into those channels. So.
One quick additional comment, very brief. Sorry. In that room of the consultative group, there is amazing agreement. It's extraordinary, and you've got everyone from environmental groups to welfare groups to near activist groups almost, and lenders, and everybody's in the room, customers, and we're in furious agreement about almost everything. It's, how we get there and how fast and all those things are another challenge.
Just briefly, you think you're confused. You should have been in that first group. Unbelievable. I think we started off with over 1,000 things from Deloitte, and we had to try and break them down. And you're right. It was one of the chewiest processes I have ever been through. And to see exactly what Don said now, to be in a room in that consultative committee with those other people involved in, and we're all in the same boat, rowing the same way. So and it's not that long. We've come a long way in a short time.
And Bryce, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, look, I think Don sort of mentioned it well, but I do think, I mean, when I first got involved, and I had a conversation with Pip, and I sort of said, well, what are the outlines that we're trying to achieve, and where's the timeline to get to them? And I think Pip laughed and said, you really haven't ever worked in sustainability, have you? And that's probably the space, is that it will continue to evolve. I think the really important thing to focus on is what we've done in the Australian context in the framework is really widely consultated with various groups and supply chains. And I think Pip Band and Prue Bonfield that led the first group really should be commended for how wide we took this. If you look at some of the other global roundtables, they are a little more specific around one supply chain. And I think that's the great opportunity we've got in this space is that it is that wide space. But I agree with you that we need to continue to work up on cleaning up the messaging coming out of it.
Fabulous. Yes, there are a lot.
Madam Chairman, I won't get up because it's a bit difficult.
No
Denzel
worries.
Clark from Tarcutta. I'm going to throw a whole new idea into the ring. My son did engineering and science at university. We've had a lot of discussions about carbon in the atmosphere, and we've come up with a conclusion. We don't want less carbon in the atmosphere, we want more carbon in the atmosphere, because carbon is our lifeblood. Carbon drives our plant growth. Our plant growth produces oxygen. You produce more oxygen, you reduce the carbon ratio in the atmosphere. We also need an increase in temperatures. 30 years ago, the average temperature was 13 degrees Celsius. Today, I looked it up the other day, 14 degrees. All the scientific experts say to maintain a profitable agricultural industry, you need average temperatures of 15 degrees. This MLA association should not be doing studies about how to reduce carbon, because I believe we're carbon negative now. And the only reason we're not claimed that way because our bloody politicians went to Kyoto and excluded existing pasture land and existing forest areas from that equation. So we've got to start from nothing.
Well, thank you. Let's take that point up. Don, is that one that you want to deal with?
I should have sat down the other end of the room. I don't think I should get into that debate particularly. Whether there's, I'm taking your point, but I'm not sure that I'm qualified to say whether what we're doing is a good or a bad thing versus your commentary around temperature change. But no matter what it is, we do have to manage our environment well. We need to do a lot of things with our environment. I do take your point about grasslands. I understand that point really well, having run AA company for 10 years. So the measurement of those things is vital, and we are, of course, in the work we're doing, talking about balance of tree and grass cover. So we are looking at those things, but I'm not sure there's an answer to your comment, really. I know you've made a comment rather than a question, so perhaps that's...
Sure. Okay, well, we'll take that one as a comment. Thank you for getting involved. And we'll take the next question.
Thanks, Matt Dalgleish Picardo. It's probably two related questions. They'll be quick. On live export, I'm guessing Mark might want to answer this. I'm hoping he will anyway. First of all, just with the animal activists wanting to ban live sheep initially, if they're successful with that, potentially they're going to go, do you think, and then look to ban live cattle? If they're successful at that, is it the short end of the wedge? And then they look to turn around and maybe look at red meat consumption generally. That's question one. Question two would be with regards to moving away from live export totally, as you suggested, Mark, was your preference. Study Mercado's done has shown that about 40 to 57% of the value chain to the export port is retained by producers. So that's a good kind of amount of the chain that goes to producers. It underpins jobs in regional centres. It also, we think, underpins prices, particularly through drought for livestock. Can we have both processing and live export in Australia?
Mark.
Look, I can probably comment on the first one in around groups lobbying. It's interesting. We've seen in our business in the last 2 years, especially around university holidays, a whole heap of protesters standing out the front of our plant, stopping trucks coming in. They don't care about the animals that are on it. You know, they stop. We all know that while trucks are moving, the animals are standing up. As soon as the trucks stop, they all lie down. So there's issues with animal welfare there. They cry and they send them off and do all the things. So that is becoming more and more so. There's 3 groups that I can think of that picket Brooklyn, and they also Dinmore, I know, in Ipswich as well. They tie up the police. We've had up to 160 police there escorting the trucks in, and I don't see that stopping. They're there to make sure, and they've all got "Go Vegan" written on their t-shirts. They might be wearing Blundstone boots, but they've got "Go Vegan" and driving around in Porsches with leather seats. But their aim is to stop people eating meat. So I don't think that's going away. I think that's going to get. We'll see more and more of that.
Yeah, apologies to people who hear me talk about this a lot, but we've got to differentiate between welfare and activists who are clearly wanting us to not have anything. Horses, dogs and cats at home. If you go to the PETA organisation, that's where they come from. So we've just got to do the very best that we can to manage what we have got control of, and that's looking after them well, because there is no doubt those groups won't stop at all. So, but we have to continue to keep on side the welfare organisations, the likes of RSPCA and others that we work closely with. So I know they're the one organisation that has a view about LiveX, which is unfortunate, but everywhere else, part of their DNA is the commercial use of animals. It's the way they're built. So we've got to work with them. We've got to make sure we don't provide oxygen wherever possible to the others by doing things well. And otherwise, we've got no other defence, I don't think.
Now, we are getting very close to the end of the session, so I think we have time for one more question. And this gentleman has had his hand up.
Thank you. Chairman Don, if that tickle in your throat's got particularly bad, you might notice that I have a phone, I could ring you. It was refreshing to hear, Don, your referral to profitability as a measure of the success of our program to 2030. And I'm sorry, I think I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Paul Wright, from cattle producer from Taroom, Queensland.
Thanks, Paul.
The question is about live exports. The live exports are an important element of sheep and cattle producer profitability and sustainability, whilst meat processors have called for and supported the closing of the live export trade, claiming that they can slaughter and process the product. The most recent Senate report examines the limitations of the effectiveness of RMAC in resolving inherent conflicts of interest. Are you able to tell us how RMAC attempts to manage these obvious commercial conflicts of interest between the various red meat industry sectors that it represents, at the same time as advising government on important issues such as live sheep and cattle exports? Thanks, Don.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think the RMAC is designed, which, John Anderson, when it was set up those 20 odd years ago, was designed to be an advisory group for the supply chain. Now, by its inherent nature, there are competitors within that supply chain and alternative tracks for animals. So I think it's probably unreasonable to expect that RMAC will be the be-all and end-all of delivery of messaging for specific elements. And I think this is where, you know, RMAC sort of cops the rap when it doesn't come in absolute strong support of certain parts of industry. In the most recent, RMAC supports, and all members of RMAC, including the processing sector, supported the retention of live exports across Australia. They are competitors to live exports, so clearly, you know, they would see this as an opportunity. But I get that, but I think it's not reasonable to, you know, sort of, I guess, put it all on RMAC that we have to be the speakers for all elements. That's what all the peak councils are for. They're the ones that need to represent their specific interests when they are not necessarily everybody in the room agrees. And I can't imagine that everybody in the room will always agree. You know, we've got a McDonald's rep here, but I suspect, you know, they're competitors in Hungry Jack's and Wendy's and Carl's Jr. and all the rest of it. It's just the way life is. We're in a competitive world. So it was set up to supply that cross-chain work, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, now we are very much closing in on the end of the session. I wanted to hand over to Don to make a quick announcement, an important announcement.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I was hoping to actually provide an announcement on the makeup of the ongoing sustainability framework. We have already appointed, and I'd like to announce the appointment of Tess Herbert. And Tess was in fact a member of the inaugural framework under the leadership of Prue Bonfield. Tess has put her hand up, and I really do appreciate you doing that, and we look forward to your leadership of the framework going forward. We are very close to announcing another several people. There are some people moving off. Some are moving off now. Some are moving off over the next sort of few months, and we will be bringing people back to the committee that will provide expertise in the areas that are absent because of their moving on. So we thank those that have made a contribution to date over the last few years, and we look forward to Tess leading us forward. So thank you, Tess.
Congratulations. Thanks everyone for participating in person, on Twitter, through the activities. We really appreciate you being here. And if you want more information on the framework, come to the stand opposite the exit of the room. And also, if you want to vote in the AGM, you need to register outside this room. So go forth and do that. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks to all the panellists. Let's give them a huge round of applause. That was a big session.